You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
The most badass intro on the internet. That's what I think. Right? Don't you think? That's like just such a total badass intro, from the graphics to the McEnroe reference to the sounds.
I think everything about this show is badass. You're not supposed to mix generations. You're not supposed to mix astrology and sports. You're not supposed to mix sports, astrology, geopolitics, and whatever else comes to mind. We're about to get serious.
We're fucking it up here. That's what we're doing. We're fucking it up.
We're fucking up everybody's paradigm.
When they say that in the hip hop world, we're fucking it up.
I don't know if they'd say it like that. They'd probably say something way dumber and way stupider, because it's just such low grade trash at this point. The people demand better, and the people will get better because people are snapping out of hip hop hypnosis, but a lot of people are still very much in it.
Oh,
and they're never getting out, which is sad.
No, it is. It is one of those escape rooms where they can't find the key, right?
Yeah, I mean, hip hop hypnosis. It's like traveling through life in a mobile mental asylum. You know what I'm saying? It's just a silly way.
It's like
when you see some kid bumping like hip hop like very enthusiastically in his car, that's what that car is. It's a mobile mental asylum.
It's true, right?
You know,
I've had this conversation with other people before. If you really break this down, because kids in the hood get high at a really young age. They start getting high around 8, 9, 10 years old, right?
Whoa.
Yes, it's true. And they're smoking this incredibly powerful weed, and who knows what they're putting in the weed. So when you have a kid that age, now brain development takes place pretty much up until the majority of brain development takes place up until the age of 5, but there's about 5% of the brain that hasn't fully developed, which is a really important 5%. And that doesn't really fully develop until around 18, 19 years old. So if you're a young kid in the hood and you're getting high on like really, really powerful weed, right? Your brain is not developing fully. So even that 5% gets atrophied, and it becomes a real issue. Then you throw on top of that what they're listening to, right? In that state of being high, altered with who knows what, which is, being pumped into the modern weed. And they're listening to mumble rap and trap and, all this shit that, I like music, and I have a pretty wide spectrum of music that I could listen to. There's no way I could spend more than 10 seconds with that stuff.
Right. And herein lies the hip hop hypnosis, because then from there, you got the drugs, you got the music, but you add in the internet, and it's this rapid new song every other week, new video. The videos are 2 minutes long. That's how long the songs are, 2 minutes. Some are 1 minute and 40 seconds.
You know why? You know why that is?
Why is that?
TikTok.
Okay.
They're making media for TikTok.
Right. But you know what's interesting about that? The TikTok thing, the short form video, and I saw a coordinated effort from TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, where I think it was in the year 2022, it was just all those platforms went to short form video, right?
TikTok started the trend, though.
Right. Yeah, I'd agree with that. But it's like the short form video is, in a way, I think it's got to be destroying literacy in some way. It's got to be, destroying attention spans. And I can't lie, it works, because I do find myself doing this, scrolling. They figured out how to do it, get us scrolling on these short form videos.
Well, you think, hey, it's just another 90 seconds of my life.
Right.
And then 2 hours later, that's where those 90 seconds have taken you.
Right. But like, it's crazy because like they got all these like throwback sports clips from the 90s, all these interviews, all these highlights. And it's like, oh my God, You literally lay down, and then like 5 to 10 minutes have passed, and you're like, well, what the fuck just happened? You know what I mean? So they've engineered a way to get us to do this: scroll and TikTok, waste our time. TikTok.
TikTok away.
Mm-hmm.
Fran says a lot of yes, and a lot of their moms are on drugs during pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a stretch. So you have already sort of drug damaged kids stepping into a drug damaged environment, and then having their own relationship with drug damaging substances. Matt Moon Crazy, he says, I started weed at 12 and I know it cost me. So Al, I would assume that you have partaken in your life. Would that be a safe assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to be a super enthusiastic weed guy because back around 2015, 2016, that was the peak of my pot use. I was fully on board with this is our civil rights thing, man. We got to legalize pot. Well, it'll lead to a cultural and economic renaissance. I was fully on board with that. Fast forward to 2023, I stopped smoking around 2018, 2019. Legalization of pot in Massachusetts, it's not great, man. It's like it's become like fast food. It's everywhere, and the people are walking in and out, and it's not the most impressive crowd. So I'm not, out here saying that marijuana is the worst thing ever, but I would say this: the commercialization and within a capitalist society, it's not working out right now because it's become like fast food, like I said. And I used to smoke pot. I used to be really enthusiastic about it, but I can't do it anymore. My tolerance it's gone. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back with the strong pot nowadays.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that they should do is that they should make weed legal if you're 18, right? Is that how it is now? You have to be 18?
I think it's 21 where
21.
I am at.
Okay, I think, look, here's what I think. Not that it matters what anybody else thinks what I think, at least in that world. But growing your own weed should be okay. Like, you have a personal relationship. You get, a certain amount of plants. But other than that, I don't think legalization should be on the table.
Yeah, I agree with decriminalization because the commercialization, man, it leads to. Because here's the thing: I was like a normal guy, the National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws. I was like,
right,
man, and there was always an argument out there that okay, if pot is legalized, it's gonna become like alcohol. It's gonna become like fast food. They were right because I'm seeing it right now, and the legal pot I would recommend people stay the fuck away from. Because it's not the same as people growing it in their backyard. There's something weird about this stuff. I don't like it at all. You want to hear a weird synchronicity? I have a really similar hat as you.
Yeah, there you go. Look at that.
Isn't that cool?
That is cool.
Yeah.
So my question is, how old were you when you started getting high?
8th grade, 14.
Yeah, 14 years old.
Yeah, and here's the crazy thing. I used to really start smoking pot after my football games because I would play the whole game. You know what I mean? And the day after, I'd be done. I'd be physically done. And I would smoke weed and I would listen to Alex Jones for the full 3 hours. I'll tell you what, man, that was a ride. That was a fucking ride. Like 15, 16.
What year was this? How old were you?
I'm like, between like, freshman, junior in high school. That was kind of my ritual. After games, I would take the day off and I would smoke weed and I would listen to Alex Jones for the full 3 hours.
Like the early 2000s or something like that?
Yeah. This is around then. Yeah.
That was prime Alex Jones. Alex was actually interesting back then.
He was awesome back then. And he was fully locked in. And he was the most based available.
I agree.
I don't see him that way anymore, but he used to be the most based around as far as I was concerned.
Alex was, he was back in the early 2000s. He was just getting his feet wet with syndicated radio, and then some of that stuff was being flipped onto YouTube, right?
Yeah.
No, he was really good back then, and now he's, I don't know, he's a kind of a caricature of himself,
right?
And I don't really trust Alex Jones.
I don't. It was ever since that second Rogan interview where I was like, "Yo, what's going on with this dude? This isn't quite right. There's something strange going on. He could be getting paid, or he could just be not what I thought." But it's interesting because I used to be a big Alex Jones guy, right? But then I was like, yo, this is getting a little bit much. Like, it's getting a little too high octane for me. I need to be able to fit in with society. And then I went to Rogan, and then I was still smoking pot during this period. And my thing was like, oh yeah, we got to prove the stereotypes wrong. I'm going to be like a weed smoking athlete. So I was really into like smoking pot and playing basketball. That was my jam. So it wasn't like I was ever couch locked. I was like a fully active, like prove the stereotypes wrong type of weed guy. That's what I was into.
I'll tell you who was one of the early trailblazers. And I got a story about the trailblazers too.
Rasheed Wallace?
No, well, we'll get into that in a second. But there was a guy, you may remember him or you may know of him, Bill Lee, who used to pitch for the Boston Red Sox. Have we ever talked about him?
No, he sounds familiar though.
Bill Lee was a guy who pitched for the Red Sox,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a left-hander, of course. And his nickname was the Spaceman. And they even did, the Sports Illustrated did a cover on him one time, and he was wearing one of NASA's astronaut suits without the helmet, and he was on the mound pitching because he was so out there. And he was very upfront about his weed usage as a player. This is back in like the 70s. I think Bill Lee pitched into the 80s. His end game was really weird, but he pitched, and he would always talk about, getting high, and he would run and train while he was high. So I remember reading that as a kid, and I used to do that. I used to get high and I would run, and I would just run forever. I mean, it was
Right.
kind of an amazing experience, actually.
Yeah.
But he was one of the forerunners. And then another guy who used to get high in baseball a lot was a guy by the name of Ferguson Jenkins, who was a pitcher. He was Canadian, and he actually got busted a couple of times for weed. But he was not as out front about Bill Lee. So Bill Lee winds up in Montreal, and he was, again, this very outspoken guy. And there was this guy who played for the Expos by the name of Rodney Scott. And Rodney was a pretty good player. He wasn't great, but he was a good player. He could steal some bases. And they traded Rodney Scott. And Bill Lee turned into a fucking race issue, right? He turned it into, and he was always kind of high maintenance anyway. And he said to the ownership group of the Expos or the GM, "I'm not playing in protest of your trading Rodney Scott." And the funny thing was, is Rodney Scott was like, "Bill, what are you doing? I'm getting traded." It's like not that big a deal, right? And so the Expos said, "Fine, we'll release you." And that was it. He was done. He was done. He never played. He never threw another pitch in the major leagues. There's a good documentary on him called Spaceman on YouTube. You can find it. And he's a Massachusetts guy, like Massachusetts, New England. That's his territory.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think generally marijuana peaked in 2012. That's probably when it was culturally somewhat cool because it was still somewhat illegal. Now I think it's just mainstream, and it's just like, ugh. Like I smell it, and it's so pungent that it smells poisonous around here. In every downtown city you're in nowadays, it reeks of pot, and it's just not it anymore. It smells like fast food to me. It's got the same sort of odor to it.
One day on 15 Minutes, I was sort of ruminating and speculating at any given moment of the day, how many people are high or are on some kind of drug that you're passing on the highway, right? You just,
oh my God. Yeah.
You don't know how many people are driving around high. You don't know how many people are driving around on psych meds, right? Or combination of the two, right? It's like when you think about that, it's like, holy shit, you're right. Like a lot of these people out here, are, they're projectiles waiting to happen. And then of course you throw in the death jab, and that brings a whole other layer of the conversation into it.
Yeah, it's wild, man. I've become a huge advocate for just sobriety, sharp and sober. That's what I like nowadays. And like especially amongst people who are highly professional, I almost assume they're on something. You know what I mean? Just to get through their careers, their jobs, their lives. It's just so pervasive, man. So many performance enhancing drugs aren't confined to just the sports world.
Right. There's a lot of people who are who was I remember reading about this slew of writers back in the 90s, where there was like this kind of, I guess you would call it an interesting wave of like fiction writers, like who'd be in that group. The guy who wrote oh shit, I'm drawing a blank.
The Big Lebowski.
No, the movie with Christian Bale, American Psycho.
Oh wow, okay.
Bret Easton
The
Ellis.
classic, yeah.
Yeah, like that wave of writers, a lot of them were taking speed and just cranking out like manuscripts, right? Which is not uncommon. I don't think Jack Kerouac was that way. Jack Kerouac wrote on speed.
Yeah. The thing with those types of substances I've heard, and it makes sense to me, that people write on those a lot, but then they just realize it's all trash. Like they read it and they're like, what the fuck is this? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, for writing, I wouldn't view something like that as like a wonder drug or like a super drug. I would interpret it as something that like people think it is a wonder drug or a super drug, but it's really not. It's just all in their mind. You know what I mean?
Dave Eggers is one of the guys I was thinking of who wrote this
book.
But
American Psycho's sick. I like that movie. It's a good movie.
American Psycho is actually a pretty amazing movie.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Dave Eggers is an American author, and his memoir, A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius, which was published in 2000. It came out that he wrote that on speed, right?
Huh.
So a lot of people like, oh, you cheated, whatever.
Well, right. Speed would be like Adderall or something like that, right?
It is. It's exactly
amphetamine, essentially.
Yep. Yeah, it is. It's So, all right, we got some ground to cover here sports wise. We're in Scorpio still. We looked at all those Scorpio athletes.
Dude, you know what's crazy? I gotta say this real quick. You know how you've been talking a lot about Pluto and Scorpio?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have Pluto and Scorpio.
I know, you're a millennial. I know.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like a prototypical millennial in that sense.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because I was thinking about like last night on the show, and I was thinking about, I did this thing with like work through the various generations. I don't know if you caught that. Did you catch that last night?
I watched that last night. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we talked about this last week, but Pluto and Scorpio has to kind of die to some version of their relationship to the culture and reinvent it in their own way, right? And be able to. And I used Tim Pool as an example last night,
right?
And I'm not a huge Tim Pool fan, but he's doing exactly what I was talking about, right? Yeah. He's got his little compound. They're going to start a cafe, right? That's Pluto and Scorpio shit.
Yeah. Right? If I saw Tim Pool on the street, I would assume it's like an 8th grade skateboarder or something. You know what I mean? It's like, right. Dude, you're 40 years old. Lose the fucking beanie. You know what I'm saying? He needs to lose that.
He's got a chrome dome up there.
Have you seen the clip where the guy takes his hat off?
No.
Oh my God, dude. Oh my God. There's this clip. We might have to YouTube it. I think this guy, Matt takes off Tim Pool's hat. They're at some like Antifa style, protest or whatever around 2017, 2018. He goes up to fucking Tim Pool, takes his hat off. It makes a little face like this. And then Tim Pool is irate. He's like, hey man, they're going to recognize me, Antifa. You know why I wear that hat? And he just spazzes out and totally loses his cool. And he's completely bald. And it's one of the greatest clips I've ever seen in my life.
What did his head look like?
It's bald. It's, it's kind of how you would imagine it. You know what I mean? It's just, there's not a lot going on there.
Yeah.
And you can see why he wears the beanie, but at the same time, dude, just go bald. He should reinvent himself and go bald.
Well, it's
lose the skateboard, lose the rollerblades, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, take my political opinion seriously. I'm gonna go skateboard. Like, dude, you know what I'm saying? Like, I find Tim Pool hilarious.
So getting back to you, right? And this whole idea of Pluto and Scorpio and work, like you have made a choice to do construction work because you want to write. Right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. That's part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And because I like the atmosphere, and somewhere like I've been in office environments where there's some HR person up your ace. I just could not survive in an environment like that because it would drive me nuts.
Yeah.
And with the construction gig, it's a lot like being on a football team or a baseball team, and they don't really care what you do. You know what I'm saying? Nobody, like, if I tell people, oh yeah, I wrote a book, my pen name is Dawg, they're like, oh, that's cool, man. Follow your dreams. So, you know what I
Right.
mean? No, like literally nobody cares. It's not like some Karen. I don't necessarily like that term. It's not like somebody's gonna like, just be all up in your ace. I don't need that. A lot of companies are like that. Like, I'm never going to climb the corporate ladder. And that's what I like about Gen Z. They're seeing that is kind of fruitless. You know what I'm saying? Like, climbing the corporate ladder has never been in my game plan. For a lot of my
Right.
buddies, it is. That was their game plan from the beginning. I have this one buddy. We were talking about millennials who are sellouts. Like, I had this one friend in college who would say, like, yeah, I'm going to sell out. I'm just going to totally sell out. And he did. And I think he's, triple J'd at this point. He sold out.
Right. Right.
But that was his plan. And it's like, okay, I kind of admire your honesty in that sense.
Well, the bar for selling out just gets higher and higher.
Mhm.
Right. It's like, okay, well, I'll sell out because I'll work for a company that I may not fully believe in, but that's okay because I'll get a 401k and maybe I'll get some stock options. And then you stay in the company. It's like, well, we've got some internal changes here. And we need to start doing some things that are different. Like, well, first of all, you're going to have to get jabbed. Right. Oh, no problem. I'll do that. Oh, yeah. And by the way, we're going to be a part of a diversity, inclusion, and equity campaign, and we need you to participate. Okay, well, I'll do that. Right. Oh, now we're having these really interesting seminars about white fragility, and we need you to participate in that. Okay, once you're in
Right.
at that level and you start to sell out, the bar just keeps getting raised.
Right.
I was thinking about this with super chats on YouTube, right? And most of the time, super chats tend to be it's like a Pavlovian thing, right? Like, they reward people. So if you want to get your comment across on a StreamYard, and you do a super chat, well, you'll get right to the top, right? Which means that people are just there for the for the show or whatever. Don't want to do super chat. Their comments may be read, or maybe they'll be read at the end, right? So now we're prioritizing who gets to say something inside the chat, like they're currying economic favor. In most cases, it can be complimentary, but not in all cases. And I've been watching this one guy who does the 49ers, Larry Kruger, who is fucking everywhere. All he does is stream, right? And Larry's actually a really talented guy, and he has mostly good takes, but he pissed off a lot of like Trey Lance people, and they're going after him. So what they'll do is they'll do these super chats for like $5.99 or $6.99, and they'll abuse him, right? So it and it's not just one or two. He'll get like $100, $200 in super chats, but he has to eat a lot of shit in order to get that $200, right? And I just thought, this is really weird. It's a really, really weird form of exchange. It almost feels like, sadomasochistic in some ways. Like it's almost like, the Weimar Republic, where a young hooker, or a young dancer who's doing some dark burlesque, gets paid to have people spit on her or something like that,
I
right?
think it's more comparable to people paying to throw tomatoes at them.
That was one of the other things that I used as an example, right? The guy at the Ren Fair where he chucked tomatoes at, right? But it's darker because, like, when you throw a tomato, it's not personal, right? You're just throwing a tomato at a guy who's barking insults. But when you are saying something in a comment, and that comment is directly pointed at the person who's taking your super chat, it's very, very different. But I did think of that analogy, and it's like this weird. All right, let me throw this out to you. Would you accept super chats if they were just completely abusive and kind of sadistic, Would you do
No,
that?
no, I don't think I would, because you got to understand this guy. He's participating in this abuse.
I agree,
So,
right?
you
And
know,
it's not out of the. I don't think it's out of a sense of fairness. Like, well, I'll read your comment because I
yeah,
want to be fair. No, he's doing it because he wants the money.
yeah,
And I think it sets up a really, really bad spiritual relationship with what you're doing. This gets to the sellout part, which is what you're talking about,
yeah,
and why I brought it up.
yeah. The whole concept of selling out is quite funny, because it's not necessarily about the dollar amount. It can be as small as a, super chat, or it can be, a corporate contract or something like that. Or we see it all the time in sports. People just sort of, they'll sell out to a brand that pays them, and they
Right.
may not believe in it or care about it, but they're getting a check from Sprite. They're getting a check like Travis Kelce. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
For
he's a big fucking whore,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So he's a sellout. He's a big
He's a
sellout.
big fucking whore.
You know who's not a sellout? Kyrie Irving. Kyrie
Yeah, I'd agree with
Irving
that. I'd
was
agree with
willing to turn Kyrie Irving was willing to turn down $33 million.
Yeah.
I believe that man has integrity. He's somebody I admire.
I like Kyrie too, and I know a
Yeah.
lot of people that don't like him, but I
Dude.
like Kyrie, and he only had to walk back his statement a few feet.
Right. You know what's crazy, man? The all-out hatred for Kyrie Irving in the Boston area, or at least it was a couple of years ago, is just off the charts, just abysmal and out of proportion.
Well, I
and just,
kind of get that for Boston because
Yeah.
he wanted to have his own team, right? And he was supposed to be the guy, and it never really worked, right? He had
Yeah.
injuries. Sometimes he'd play, sometimes he wouldn't play. Maybe it
Mhm.
was the coaching, maybe it was the mix of players around him. He was supposed to be him,
Mhm.
right? And he wasn't him.
Yeah.
And he had a lot to do with it. And so, okay, I'm out of here. Get me to, Brooklyn so I can be with Durant, right? I mean, that's really
Right.
what it came
But
to.
yeah, I'm a Kyrie
I can
guy.
understand the hate, though. I can understand the hate.
I can't, because I just find him admirable. And I think when people hate, or they love for that matter, it's emotional. And I think that when people are emotional, they're more susceptible to manipulation, and they're more susceptible to just wild behavior. You know what I mean? Like, I hate this basketball player. Like, really, buddy? You know what I'm saying? Like in Boston too, they get out of control with it. Like, oh, I just can't stand him. It's like, dude, you know what I mean? They're out of control. But Kyrie, man, he has integrity, and so does Aaron Rodgers for that matter. You know what I mean? Aaron.
Well, unless Aaron took the fall, right? If he took the
Oh,
fall,
okay. That's a good point. I have a great clip I want to show you at some point. I actually sent it to you in the chat, because Aaron Rodgers he's throwing the football already,
he is throwing
and
the football.
the Jets are on a 2-game winning streak.
Well,
They beat the Eagles, and they just recently beat the Giants. And
you
Aaron
and
Rodgers is throwing the
you and
football.
I went
Mhm.
back and we did that show, and we looked at Rodgers.
Yep.
And we looked at Rodgers looking at the sideline saying, should I fall now?
Oh
Right.
yeah.
And when that happened, I'm like, oh, he'll be back.
Exactly. But
He'll
like,
be
dude, if you look at this clip, it almost proves it. I think the timeline right now, November, towards the end of November, rumors will start getting hot, but December is when really it'll be getting like, oh my God, Aaron Rodgers is coming back. And one
Right.
show called it, and we're already going to see it coming. Like, it's going down. So I spoke a little too soon if I said he had a bunch of integrity. He kind of showed some integrity, but I think he's definitely willing to play ball a little bit. And I think he's going to be playing ball this season. And
I think he'll come back. That's
yeah.
my sense. By the way, Kyrie Irving's in Aries, and they're unapologetic.
Mm-hmm.
They are unapologetic. So when he makes a stance or he says something, he's generally not going to walk it back. Right.
Right.
That's how Aries operates. And Travis Kelce is a Libra. So they're opposite signs. And not that Travis Kelce is walking anything back, but Travis Kelce is clearly way more of a sellout than Kyrie Irving.
Big
Way
time.
more.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? This whole idea of a sellout was really prevalent. It really started to take root in the 60s. Hold on a second. Hold on.
Yeah. So while Robert's dealing with that, there are a few things on the menu tonight. We're definitely going to be talking about Colorado Buffaloes football. And okay, he's back.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Yeah. So going back to the 60s, the whole idea of selling out was it was a big deal. Like you just didn't do it. I mean, if you watch Mad Men in reruns, like it
Yeah.
comes up repeatedly with some of the characters and who they run into in their lives outside of work. And they'll run into people who have very different relationships with capitalism, right? And it was a big deal in the 60s. And even to a certain extent in the 70s, selling out was, if you sold out, you were kind of toast culturally, right? Like people were rewarded for their outsider or rebellious status. And I think that changed somewhere in the 90s. That really changed in the 90s. A little bit in the 80s. Like, what was that show with Michael J. Fox? Was it Family Ties, or what was it called? What was that? Do you know that show where he played Miles, the kid who was, do you remember it was Michael J. Fox and
I don't. A little before my time. I vaguely know what you're talking about.
Anyway, his character in The Family. I always get those shows. I didn't really watch TV in the 80s, but it was one of those family shows, and he played this young capitalist, right? Michael J. Fox, and he was, very preppy. And that was during the whole greed is good period.
Okay.
Gordon Gekko, Wall Street, there was this kind of vibe in the air. It was, and do you know about the four turnings, like the first turning, second turning, third turning, and fourth turning? Do you know about them?
I don't. What are you talking about?
So there was this book written called The Fourth Turning, and it has to do with these cycles of time that kind of go. You can go back and you can see them, like you can see it like with the so-called Civil War, World War I, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So the four turnings are comprised of the first turning, which is related to spring.
Okay.
And the last version of the first turning took place after World War II in this country. And that turning is called the season of the hero. And when you look at what happens after World War II, you have all these war movies, right? They're all, John Wayne, Audie Murphy, Gary Cooper, and they're all heroic. It's all about beating the Germans or beating the Japs, right? So it's the time of the hero. Sports really starts to take off. Football takes off. Baseball takes off, right? All these guys are home from the war. You get guys like Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, towards Willie Mays, right? We could just fill in the blanks, right? It's the time of the hero. It's related to spring. The second turning happens during the 1960s, and it's called the season of the artist. And when you look at the 60s, right, you have this artistic expression. The anti-hero becomes more important than the hero, right? You have people like Steve McQueen and Clint Eastwood and Paul Newman, and these are countercultural icons, and it's associated with things like the Summer of Love. It's divergent. It's like a divergent path, right? And at that time, in a lot of ways, America's kind of at high noon in the 60s. And then the next turning after that really occurs in the 80s and 90s. And it's called the season of the hermit, or the season of the nomad. The season of the nomad. And that's when people are sort of uprooted. They have no kind of social mooring in a lot of ways, right? And that's supposed to be the fall. So you have the summer, which is the season of the artist, which coincides with the summer of love. And then you have the season of the nomad, and you have that time is really typified by people who are not just uprooted physically and moving around and trying to find another place, but they're uprooted in terms of their like beliefs and values, and they're trying to find themselves, right? And that is connected to the fall. And when you look at that period, that's when they started to essentially loot the economy, right?
Mhm.
They had the S&L crisis, savings and loan crisis in the 80s, late 80s, because savings and loans were deregulated. You had, Michael Milken and junk bonds, Ivan Boesky. They were just fucking raping the system, right?
So sort of a
Uh,
late stage capitalism. It's
well,
very
yeah, it is.
decadent,
They're
really.
like, okay, let's, you have Reaganomics,
Mhm.
the supply side theory where
Yeah.
we're going to basically, cut the taxes for the rich and super wealthy. And the idea is that they would have more money to do things. And so they would start businesses and the money would float downstream, which
Okay.
didn't really happen. Right.
Mhm.
So it's all part of this period of time, like in the 90s and even going into the 2000s. That really ends in 2008 with the housing crisis, right? When, all those bad derivatives came due. So now we're in what's called the season of the hermit, right?
Mm.
So this is the winter. This is winter in America right now. So these are the four turnings. And when you get into this period in faith, everything is like fallow. There's no growth. The growth that does occur is usually underground. That's where people tend to hang out. It's kind of the end of these turnings, right? And so just if you go back prior to the first turning, that's all World War II,
Mhm.
right? That is World War II territory. And then out of that, there's this next turning, which is again the season of the hero. So here we are. We're right in that phase right now, and of course we have all these shenanigans and high theater and the macabre taking place in the Middle East. So we're lining up to fully be in the fourth turning, right? That's what's happening. It's the winter of America.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah, so it's in and getting into this fourth turning, right? We just had a hockey player die in the ice, right? The
Yeah.
winter, it's like the scythe of Capricorn took out this hockey player. So fill us in on that. Again, season of Scorpio, and we lose a player in a live action sport. What happened?
I mean, I think it's worth pulling up the clip so everybody has things in context. But there was this black hockey player in England. He raises his boot to use it as a weapon while he's skating, hits a man in the neck, and kills him in cold blood in front of everybody. It was explicitly a murder. And I think he should be publicly euthanized. This just piece of trash animal. That's a basic synopsis. So I think his name is, if you
Adam
were to,
Johnson.
well, that's the guy who died, right? And the guy who killed him, his name is Matt Petgrave. So
Matt
he is,
Petgrave?
yeah, that's his name. He's quite a feral little piece of trash, and I think he should be immediately dealt with. And I think that NHL players should go on strike until he's dealt with publicly.
Let's
That's how
look at
strongly I
this.
feel about
Let's
this.
look
So
at
it's pretty
this.
bad. It's pretty horrendous. It's pretty brutal.
I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to slow the playback speed. Let's go half speed. And let's take the volume off because it'll interfere with the playback. Okay, so here we go. This is in England, right?
Yep. Some sort of exhibition, I
Speaking
believe.
of sellout, look at that fucking ice. Jesus.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. There it is.
So he
Did you
lifts
see
his
it?
skate and basically drop kicks him with a knife. His skate being used as a knife.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. That's a murder. And it's just crazy how traumatizing the internet has been lately, just with all the war footage, all the graphic stuff. So that guy's dead. And the guy Petgrave is still on the loose.
Oh man, that dude.
Yeah,
That dude
exactly. So
he needs to
here's the
be
thing.
gone.
If you're an NHL hockey player or if you're one of his teammates and you have any integrity, you don't play until this is dealt with. You know what I mean? Anybody who plays after this is a joke to me. So this, for me personally, is a make or break moment for hockey.
That's
I won't
murder.
ever.
That is
Yeah,
murder.
exactly. So I won't personally ever watch or support hockey, the entire sport, in any way until this is dealt with.
I
You know
mean,
what I mean?
honestly, any hockey league that's viable right now
Yeah.
should just stop. Not just the NHL.
Exactly. Show some integrity.
That
Because
is
dude,
fucking-
I'm like, I love sports. I love playing sports, but it's moments like this where it's like, I'm not going to fucking support this in any way. You know what I mean? If this is what's going on, you know what I'm saying? Like the NFL is disgusting in terms of the stupid messages they have on the touchdown. Like, you know, their stupid social justice messages.
right.
Like, have you seen that with the, it's just awful. And
I
a guy who
I
really,
don't watch live. Fill us in.
it's impossible to watch nowadays. Like I watch the highlights. I will watch occasionally, but I've essentially been paid off because what got me back into sports is gambling. You know what I mean? So it's like, I got to look at myself a little bit here and, you know, realize what I'm participating in and whether or not I want to, because I have a firm stand on hockey right now. I'm not watching it ever again, supporting it in any way. Won't have any respect for any of the players if they continue to play when something like that occurs on the ice. You know what I mean? So that's completely unacceptable. And for people to try to the byline they're going with, it was a freak accident. It's not a freak accident. You know what I mean? So, but to tie it all in, I mentioned this earlier, a guy who actually kind of nailed it in terms of, you know, professional sports. I love sports. I love football. I love basketball. Don't get me wrong. I'm a player for real. But a guy who nailed it was actually Muammar Gaddafi. He actually nailed it when it came to sports. And I'm trying to find right now a few things I highlighted in his book, The Green Book. He has an entire section on sports, horsemanship, and the stage. And I'll just read through just a few of the things I highlighted, because when I read, I highlight things that speak to me.
Okay.
So are you ready for this, Rob?
Yeah. Read it up, man.
It is equally unreasonable for crowds to enter playgrounds and arenas to watch a player of a team without participating themselves. I love that, because it's like, play sports, man, but you don't necessarily want to be a sports fan. You know what I mean? That entire culture is a little painful. It's better to be participatory in some sort of competition, athletic. I don't care if it's chess. Like, get out there and get into it, man. It is equally illogical for the society to allow an individual or a team to monopolize sports while the society as a whole pays the cost of such a monopoly for the exclusive benefit of one person or team. He's right, because I mean, if you're building a stadium, you're going to get some sort of tax exemptions in order for that stadium to be built. So it is part of the power structure. You know what I mean? As the era of the masses does away with the instruments monopolizing power, wealth, and arms, it will inevitably destroy the monopoly of social activity in such areas as sports, horsemanship, and so forth. A few more sentences. However, those masses who are robbed of their will and dignity are reduced to mere spectators, watching another person performing what they should naturally be doing themselves. The same holds true of the crowds, who, because of ignorance, fail to practice sport by and for themselves. They are fooled by monopolistic instruments which endeavor to stupefy them and divert them to indulging in laughter and applause instead. I think he's speaking to something even bigger than sports, because it's about a huge part of our society is a spectatorship, right? Whether it's politics, war, or sports. And a guy who I really like who writes about this is, have you heard of Michael Hoffman? This guy?
Yes.
He's brilliant when he talks about part of the revelation of method is putting people
in the big revelation of the method guy.
Legend. Yeah. A big part of that is putting people in a theater seat. You know what I mean? Where we're watching the spectacle at all times. You know what I mean? Whether it's social, you know, political, economic. Anyways, the thousands who crowd stadiums to view, applaud, and laugh are foolish people who have failed to carry out the activity themselves. They line up lethargically in the stands of the sports grounds and applaud those heroes who wrest from them the initiative, dominate the field, and control the sport, and in doing so, exploit the facilities that the masses provide. That sport is a public activity which must be practiced rather than watched. And last sentence here I'll read. This is the last highlight I have. Those who direct the course of life for themselves have no need to watch, life working through actors on the stage or they're in the cinema. So it's, a huge part of just American society is spectatorship. Like I
Yes.
feel like we're all in theater seats all the time,
No, it's true. I mean, they did eliminate theater seats from movie theaters because they're almost non-existent anymore.
Right.
But they just moved them into the living room, and that's all. They just kind of relocated them.
And it's interesting how you
yeah.
mentioned we're in the age of the hermit, because
Yeah.
when we're in these theater seats, it is very hermit-like in this winter stage where and
Yeah.
it's also very hybrid. It's kind of like hibernating as a society. We're sort of
in the
hibernating and
we're in the
watching.
season of the we're in the winter, winter of America.
And you know what else was interesting when you were talking just now? It's like you talked about being in the winter, and I was also thinking through the 80s and the 90s up into the 2000s, 2008s, the music of our times totally correlates to this late stage period that we're in. And it does tie in with my book a little bit, the Charter, because the Charter is soil. It's soil to grow something new, because I think we're at just that's sort of the end of a cycle here. You know what I mean? But yeah, those are my thoughts. It gets me so angry watching a clip like that hockey clip. It's just the internet has gotten tough the last couple months, man, with all the violence and all the just graphic stuff that's there,
It's really interesting. I'm going through as I'm listening to you. I'm going through this article. Adam Johnson, police probe ice hockey death as fiance pays tribute. And then here, let me bring this up. I'm going to show you this. This is kind of typical. Again, we're in Scorpio season, right? I mean, people. It's a season of death. It's a season of, returning to the underworld, and clearly, we have something that's happened here in England with this death of this ice hockey player. Also, Northwestern State. You know about Northwestern State?
I don't.
They suspended their fucking football program.
Why?
Because I think somebody died.
Huh.
Here, let me bring up this thing here with Adam Johnson. Let me show you what they did to it. Let me show you what they did here. Okay, so Adam Johnson, police probe ice hockey death as fiance pays tribute. The sweet angel, blah, 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 right? South Yorkshire Police, which was called to the Utilita Arena in Sheffield. What's really interesting about Sheffield is that it's known for its steel.
Huh.
Right? It was the big steel manufacturer of England for a long time. And so, what happens? The guy gets his fucking neck opened up by the steel blade of another guy's skate. Right?
Wow.
South Yorkshire Police, which was called to the Utilita Arena in Sheffield, said it was a normal procedure to open an investigation when an incident was reported. For a spokesperson, our officers remained at the scene carrying out inquiries. Our investigation into the circumstances surrounding the incident remain ongoing. We would encourage the public to avoid speculation regarding the incident while we continue our inquiries. Really? Oh, okay. Well, we're not going to speculate. Well, why the fuck not? We speculate about everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's a little hint of Big Brother just kind of creeping in there. Don't worry. Just stand by. We've got it covered. The Sheffield City Council confirmed its health and safety team is assisting with the investigation. Oh boy. Councillor Joe Otten said, firstly, our thoughts are with Adam's family, friends, and teammates at this very sad and difficult time. Our health and safety team is helping the South Yorkshire Police with their investigation and will assist wherever necessary. So now they turn it into a safety issue. Okay. Neck guards mandatory. Following Johnson's death, the English Ice Hockey Association, which oversees all levels of ice hockey in the England below the Elite League, has issued safety advice to all members regarding the use of neck guards. BBC Sport understands Johnson was not wearing a neck guard, so now all of a sudden it's his fucking fault.
Right. Insane.
The EIHA said it was unacceptable for any player to lose their life while playing ice hockey. Yeah, so it's Johnson's fault. He didn't wear the fucking neck guard.
Right. It's fucking insane.
Yeah, let's blame the victim here. Let's Let's blame the victim. Right? Had he been wearing the neck guard, the premeditative sidekick with the sharpened blade to the guy's neck would have been ameliorated. Wouldn't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
The advice, with the immediate effect, it has issued a strong recommendation to all players at all levels across English ice hockey: use an approved neck guard.
You guys should be wearing neck guards and masks if you want to be really safe out there on the ice. Right?
The advice is in place until the start of 2024, when it will become a mandatory requirement. The EIHA also said it would undertake a player safety equipment review, considering all aspects of players. This is just typical fucking modern Karen society bullshit, right? Like we're gonna make sure that everybody's just safer, right? You got to be safer. Well, no, really, what you should do is you should probably suspend that asshole for delivering this death blow to this guy's neck.
I wouldn't say suspend. I think he should be publicly dealt with.
At the very least, he should be suspended.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like
very, 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 very least.
At the very, like, we're not going to let him play until we get through this.
Mm-hmm.
National Ice Hockey League team, Oxford City Stars, which have former Chelsea goalkeeper Peter Cech on the roster, will already announced players must wear neck guards at all times on the ice.
Yeah, because that happens all the time, right? People just lift their leg above their head.
Exactly.
All the time, totally.
Let me see if I can pull up a quick chart on this dude.
Okay.
You know what's interesting too is that in this piece they don't even mention the guy's name who, Bruce lead him to the neck.
Right.
Matt Petgrave.
Have you seen what he looks like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Matt Petgrave looks like he's mixed race. I was thinking we can bring this all back to sports and astrology too. Now he looks pretty black.
Yeah.
Although he could be mixed. He was born, he's Canadian. Let's see.
So you're going to pull up his birth chart and see if there's anything that relates to this incident.
Yes.
Okay. That's fairly interesting.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to just kind of
click around for a bit.
Click around for a little bit. Okay. So he was born January 29th, 1992 in Toronto, Ontario. So we know he's an Aquarius. And let's see what we get here.
Then after this, we'll get into the Colorado Buffs at some point. What did you think about Gaddafi's comments? Just real quick.
I think he's totally right.
Yeah, he crushes it, man. That's a good book he's got there.
He's totally right.
Yeah. It's called The Green Book.
Matt Petgrave.
It's on Amazon. It's pretty good.
Okay, so January 29th, 1992. And let's put him at we'll give him let's give him a noon shirt.
I guarantee no other sports show is doing this. They're probably running with some absurd freak accident narrative. We're going to pull up this guy's chart and we're going to see what's going on with this absolute piece of trash.
Now, to be fair, we don't know his birth time. Right?
Okay.
So we're dealing with kind of a limited profile, but you can derive a lot from a regular, just a 12 noon chart, because we can see like what's going on with Mars and other stuff in his chart. Oh yeah, you can totally see this thing here. Okay, let me pull this up.
Okay. And I'm learning more astrology more and more every day when I watch the astro weather and things like that. But I'm not at the point where I can read a chart just like that, like some of you guys can. It's fascinating for me to watch.
Okay, so this is Matt Petgrave's 12 noon chart. And I'm going to try to make it a little bit bigger. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see some of these aspects a bit more, because he's got concentrated. Plus, he's born in the northern hemisphere, and the houses tend to be like, okay, so Mars is connected to the application of will, right? Masculine expression, violence. Mars rules things like the military, the police force, first responders, right? It is action, sex, right? That's Mars. So he has Mars over here in Capricorn, which is exalted. Mars in Capricorn is exalted. People who have Mars in Capricorn, tend to be like really good fucking workers, and they take on a lot of responsibility. And it's through their taking on responsibility that they're able to rise up the ranks. Okay. That said, he's got a Mars-Uranus conjunction, and they're almost right on top of each other, right? 15 degrees. And to me, Uranus is, it is radical, revolutionary, destructive even, right? So you get Mars and Uranus together, it could be even in, staid and steady Capricorn, that Mars-Uranus conjunction could be wildly unpredictable, right? So what we saw, in my estimation, was an expression of a Mars-Uranus conjunction. Now, there seems to have been some degree of premeditation, whether it was during that game or some other game, right? Like who, to do that, you got to kind of work that shit out in some ways. And then here we have Neptune, which rules water, right? And it doesn't matter if the water is frozen or not, it rules water. And so now he's got Neptune, Uranus, and Mars. He's got a Neptune-Mars conjunction, which again makes his Mars potentially really dangerous. Now he's got a nice trine to Jupiter in Virgo. Great, right? It will make everything bigger if this guy is not in a place where he thinks he's actually, like, if he's not in the show, it's not going to help him. And I'm sorry, you're playing hockey in England. It's not the show, right? You're playing overseas hockey. So I think he has the potential to be wildly impetuous, right? Even if it's all buttoned up and controlled, it's really not. And then he's got Mercury at the 29th degree of Capricorn, which is anoretic. And normally Mercury in Capricorn can be really steady, very, kind of strategic, corporate, tactful. Mercury in Capricorn is really good at planning, but he's got it at 29 degrees. There's nothing left there, right? So any kind of value he can get out of Mercury in Capricorn isn't there, right? So he's dealing with kind of this kind of blank phase of Mercury, like it's active in his chart. But again, what are the long-term ramifications? Like somebody who has Mercury in Capricorn at a different degree, let's say we'll put it at 20 degrees, it would be much more in alignment with, well, if I do this, then this will happen, right? There's no kind of long-term root at that 29th degree. So the biggest part, though, is Mars, Uranus, Neptune, and they're all there, and this is potentially wildly impetuous. And Neptune could be taking things personally, right? People have Neptune Mars conjunctions. They can take things really personally, even in Capricorn, which tends to be in some ways kind of bulletproof, like strap it on, just go do the work. Doesn't matter, right? When Neptune is as close and somebody feels like their manhood is being threatened, it could be not good, right? Just not good. It's interesting because he has Moon in Sagittarius, and he's playing hockey overseas. Like that's a total Moon in Sagittarius move. Like Sagittarius represents foreign countries, and distant lands, and the moon is the home. So that makes sense, right? But he also has a moon square to Jupiter in his chart. And that, to me, that could also be very much related with lack of emotional control. And Jupiter in Virgo wants to button everything up. The moon in Sag wants to let it all hang out. So when things go wrong in this guy's life, they go wrong. Like there's, there can be a serious loss of control. And he's got Chiron. He's got this Sun-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, which is, again, another tight conjunction. And, he was, I would say that this guy's probably tired of waiting, right? Like there's an underlying condition in his chart that, and I'm not making an excuse for him at all, but he was a time bomb waiting to go off. Because if you're not, when you have a Sun-Saturn conjunction, I don't care what sign it's in, if you're not like making your mark in the world and you're not achieving, and he's over this point, like at 30, what is he, 31?
32, I believe.
32.
Or no, he's 92, so he'd be what, like 31? Yeah, you're right.
So there's a very good chance this guy's not going to make it back to the NHL.
Right.
And with a Sun-Saturn conjunction, that would be brutal, right? Because it means that your ability to manifest this, which would be, somebody who's well known for what you do and good at the game, right, or good at whatever you're going to do, if that is going to not happen, then there's other problems here, right? So if we were to take this out astrologically, where was the sun when all this happened? It was in Scorpio, right? So we have a sun square to his sun. The lunar eclipse is happening over here in Taurus. Guess what? Squaring his sun, also squaring Chiron in his chart. In Leo, this guy was definitely triggered by this eclipse. You can see anybody, and I talked about this on Sunday night, right? People with fixed signs were really the recipient of this eclipse. And this guy is a big fixed sign guy. Sun, Saturn in Aquarius, Chiron in Leo, Pluto in Scorpio. There you go. Right? Wow. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens when the Sun and Mars conjunct as Pluto, which they will. And I talked about this last night. Sun-Mars conjunction in Scorpio does not happen very often. I wonder if this guy winds up getting arrested. Like that would
I hope so, at minimum.
That would be an aspect of him getting arrested.
Do you think there's, like, I'm thinking about his attack, and it's very Scorpion-like. It was a surprise.
Total surprise.
It was one hit.
I think that's Mars. I think that's Mars and Uranus. It just comes out of nowhere, right?
Yeah. So do you think there is the possibility for vigilante justice?
Yes, I do. I
think so too.
He could fucking wind up in a river somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I saw that today and I was just like, oh my God. You know what I mean? It was just, I got really pretty angry.
The other thing about his chart, and I've brought this up before, and anybody who's in chat or listening to this, you have to take my words with a bit of a grain of salt, because I will qualify what I'm saying. He lacks water in his chart. He lacks water. So when you lack water in your chart, you're lacking empathy, right? You're lacking compassion. You're lacking emotion. Now, some people, I've seen people's charts where they don't have a high degree of water. It can be worked out in different ways. Maybe they've got planets in the 4th house. Maybe they've got planets in the 12th house. Maybe they've got planets in the 8th house. But the challenge here is the lack of water combined with the potential for this explosive Mars-Uranus conjunction. It's kind of interesting too, right? Like, he's black and he's playing hockey. And that's, it's not uncommon. There've been, a number of black hockey players over the years, right? But it's not a sport that black athletes normally gravitate towards. So Mars, which is very much related to sports and athletics, right? And combined with Uranus would be, he's participating in a sport that is not normally played by black. That's very Iranian, right? He's, very, very Iranian. So that's part of his profile, and working it out in that way, I think is kind of interesting. But, I, this guy's kind of a bit of a ticking time bomb, and transiting Pluto is right on his Mercury, right? Transiting Pluto is at 27 degrees. He's got Black Moon Lilith right there, 29 degrees. So Pluto is definitely playing a role in his chart, right? Like Pluto lingering over that anaretic Mercury at 29 is like this major dark cloud. It almost feels very much like a possession, a case of possession with Pluto at that degree. So yeah, man, I just keep your eye, right? When is that happening? I can tell you, I did this last night. I just have to get the dates in my head. So it'll be this month. It'll be right around the 15th, I think. If we go 22 degrees, so the 14th is a Tuesday, and that Mars is at 22, the sun is at 21, and that puts those planets transiting. Where did we go? Hold on. Let me go back here. It puts those planets transiting right there, right on his natal Pluto. So he will have Sun, Mars on Pluto. Yeah. So I would say look at around the 14th or the 15th, and we're just 2 weeks out from that for something to happen, some decision. Either he'll be arrested, or the other side of it is he's not arrested, and it's like, yeah, vigilante justice. I can see that happening.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, you hate to see that happen in sports, because I mean, for one thing, sports was always such a great escape because it was the one place that was a meritocracy. You know what I mean? And for that, it was always such an awesome sort of outlet. You know what I mean? Here's this one area where people can just compete, and within the rules of the game, may the best man win. And I think that facade is sort of changing because it's become so politicized. It's become so corrupt with some issues that we're seeing. It's become so there's so much agenda just jammed into it nowadays that it's becoming difficult to participate in, even if you love it, even if you grew up playing it. You know what I mean? But it is fascinating to watch from sort of an anthropological standpoint and also the astrological standpoint.
Let's take a look. Let's take a look at this guy's journey as a player.
Okay.
Now roll with me on this a little bit. Okay.
All right.
Starts off back in 08-09 playing. This is, I guess, the Ontario Junior Hockey League. Bramalea Blues. Then he plays for the Niagara Ice Dogs. Owen Sound Attack. 2 seasons there. Oshawa Generals, 2 seasons. Then he goes to the Australian Hockey League. He plays 4 seasons there. And then he plays 2 seasons for the English Hockey League, the Brampton Beast. And then he goes on this journey, right? Laval Rocket, Belleville Senators, Syracuse Crunch, the American Hockey League, all kind of minor league stuff. Goes back to England, Brampton Beast. Comes back to America, plays for the Utica Comets. Goes back to England, plays for the Brampton Beast. Comes back to America, plays for the Utica Comets. Right? This is all within the span of 2 years. Then he plays for the Florida Everblades, then the Kansas City Mavericks, then the Spiska Nova Ves HK, Pardubice HC, Czech, and then 2 years with the Sheffield Steelers.
So what I see is a lot of rejection and a lot of character issues. No way you're getting bounced around that much if you're a great teammate.
Well, I'm not a big hockey guy, but how many goals does he score? He's not a huge goal scorer. Looks like he gets quite a few assists. So what does he play? Defense. He's a defensive guy, so you're not going to score a lot. And in hockey, the defensive guys are kind of cuckoo, right? They're all kind of cuckoo. They're like the goons of the hockey. But there's no like settling down and having any kind of permanence here with any of this. This guy has been playing for going on 15 years now, and he's made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. He's made 15 stops in his basically his 15-year career. Well, how does that affect an individual just in terms of their development? You have impermanent relationships, no roots, right? You're like this vagabond. So how do you create bonds with people? Right?
He
You see where
doesn't.
you see where I'm going with
Yeah, I
this?
definitely see what you're saying here. It's just like you take this low IQ, impulsive individual, and he's not connecting with people, and he doesn't have any empathy, and he's a ticking time bomb.
Right?
So it's just a recipe for disaster, essentially, and he probably has been for a long time.
And he hasn't, he hasn't played in the NHL. I doubt if he'll ever play there now.
Mm-hmm. Never,
Although the world is so fucking inverted. Maybe some NFL team will say, all he really needs is just a shot at the NHL. He's
Yeah.
he's been struggling all these years. Come on, let's give him a shot.
Yeah, that'd be pretty awful if that occurred.
Well, our world like that is kind of wired that way, isn't it?
I don't think it's that bad yet.
No, okay. Let me look at this Adam Johnson guy. Let me check out his chart.
Mm-hmm.
So they're investigating the death.
Well, I'd be curious to see what happened during the game prior. Did they get into a scuffle? Did the other guy check him into the boards and that made him really mad? You know what I mean? I just want to see a bit more context, and I will be looking into just a bit more context just because I want to see what triggered that. You know what I mean?
Here's something to think about. Now, I don't know what the rules are for international hockey. Adam Johnson did play in the NHL.
Wow.
He's a former NHL player.
So you can see a little bit of jealousy.
Well,
you know what I mean?
No, here's where I'm going with this. I'd love your thoughts on this, because there was a time when fighting in the National Hockey League was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You would watch these guys, like I would, sit at home, and I live in California, and we didn't get the Sharks until a long time. It was a long time before hockey came to California where I lived. And so we'd watch the highlights, and I'd see these guys just beat the fucking shit out of each other.
Right.
And I'm like, what is going on here? Do they have to fight? I mean, I found it kind of amusing, but guess what? They've pretty much outlawed fighting. Now, I don't know if they've outlawed fighting in England, but you can't throw mitts in the NHL anymore.
Wow.
Right. So I have to wonder, it's like, okay, well, did this play a role in some ways? Right. Because it's a naturally aggressive sport.
Yeah.
And by banning the part that's really aggressive, did it come out in a different kind of way?
Potentially, right? Yeah. The thing with the fighting is like, yeah, it is a bit barbaric, but if it's done in an honorable way, where there's some sort of unwritten rules and guys don't use their skates as weapons, or they're, if the occasional fist fight prevents guys from using their sticks or their skates as weapons.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Blow off some steam. But with certain groups and, maybe certain people, we just can't do that. You know what I mean? So I'm not philosophically totally opposed to it. Do I like it? No, not really. I think it's barbaric, but I get it. I see where it has a place,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let me throw this up. This is the chart of Adam Johnson. This is really interesting. Let me bring this up here. Let's see if we can find this.
And Adam Johnson, I wonder, is he an American? Is he English?
Yes, he was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota.
Okay.
And Petgrave. That's even an interesting name, isn't it? Petgrave. So Matt Johnson, or Adam Johnson rather, he and Matt Petgrave both have the same moon in Sagittarius.
Huh.
What's really interesting is that, do you see that ALG right there?
Vaguely, just very, very small, but yeah, I can see what you're pointing to. Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. This is where we're going to get into some deep astrology here. Algol. This is Algol.
Okay.
And Algol is a fixed star. So when you look on the outer ring here, you'll see Algol, Aldebaran, Sirius, Regulus, Spica, and Antares. So these are the 6 royal stars, or the Behenian stars, and they rarely move. Right, Regulus in 2011 went from Leo to Virgo, and I think it's a huge deal, much bigger than people recognize, because for the longest time it was in the sign of kings and queens, and bloodlines and chivalry, and like royalty, but the things that are associated with that. So Leo's masculine, right? And in 2011 it moved into Virgo. So the shift with Regulus, which is the star that theoretically regulates the entire sky, right, became feminine. So from 2011 on, we've taken on a more feminine tone. We've moved away from this idea of the hero, or this idea of you could be the lord of your own castle, right? Which is very Leo like. Now it's kind of like, well, guess what? You'll know nothing and you'll be happy. You'll just be a worm eating plebe. And I know that that's the reductionist view of this, but it's also, I think, when Regulus went into Virgo, Virgo's a feminine sign, right? And this has, in some ways, nothing to do with you and I, who happen to be Virgos, but it kicked in this feminine hysteria, right? 2011 on, all of a sudden, we're dealing with feminine hysteria. And it even gets into this idea where Obama starts talking about America and America leading from behind, right? That happened prior to 2011, but it's in the mix. Anyway, I'm getting off topic a little bit. So Algol is one of these fixed stars. And guess what Algol represents, Al?
What?
Decapitation, wounds to the neck,
no shit.
hanging.
Okay, so Algo represents decapitation, and where he has it in his chart,
South Node and Mars conjunct.
Are you shitting
Algol.
me?
No.
That's fucking nuts, dude.
Right?
That's literally nuts.
Right? And it's so the South Node there is past life stuff, right? Theoretically, right? Past life. In this life, he's got the true node in Scorpio, which is, he's supposed to be living a very different kind of existence. Scorpio is more about sort of intention, moving psychic force versus physical force. Taurus is physical force, Scorpio psychic force. So he's, in this lifetime, he's supposed to learn how to live along those lines, but intentionality, right? So he's got something from his past here. Boom. Where did we just have the eclipse? We just had it in Taurus. And the sun in Scorpio, right, at 4 degrees or 5 degrees, which is conjunct as Jupiter, which makes everything big. Dude, this is death by eclipse. This is death by Algol, right? So one might make a case, if you're like a woo astrologer, well, he did it to somebody in a past life, so he just got what was coming. Seriously. Like, there are astrologers that could make a case for that. I'm not going to, because I think it devalues his death. But there's something there, right? There's something there about decapitation and the wound to the neck. Dude, this is astrology. We're witnessing it right here in this guy's chart. His death.
This is serious sports.
The
Nobody else.
S.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody else is doing analysis quite like this. This is wild.
This is totally wild.
So the fact that he would essentially have this neck wound was written in the stars, essentially. Like,
well, yeah, from a prior life, right? That's the South Node is the past.
Okay.
So
I thought that, okay, the South Node is the past, but the South Node to your North Node is essentially the story of your life, right?
Right. You have to live your North Node in order to access your South Node.
Okay.
You can't
That's
live
epic.
from your south node,
Mm-hmm.
which is
I have
called the dragon's tail. It's the dragon's tail. You can't live, but he has Mars conjunct the south node. Now, here's an interesting story. You know Ricky Williams, the football player?
I absolutely do. Yeah.
Ricky Williams has the south node in Aries conjunct Mars and Venus in Aries. So Ricky Williams, I talked to Ricky. He's an astrologer now. I met him one night.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about Mars on his south node. And that was his way of becoming a warrior, right? Or living out this thing that he had to do. So he became a football player. And what's interesting about Ricky is Ricky is very, like, he's got the Venus Mars conjunction. So there's a very feminine side to Ricky, very feminine side. But there's also this other side where he'd run people over, right? And so what he did is he decided that he was just going to go full on true node in his chart, which is in Libra. So what did he do? He took his wife's last name and he used his middle name instead of his first name. So he decided, well, fuck it. If I'm really into this astrology stuff and I'm going to live through my true node, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take on my wife's last name. I'm going to lose my name because Mars is there and it's male. And I'm going to lose Ricky. Ricky's also a Gemini. So he would do that shit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He would take on a whole nother name. But you can see that the Mars part got played out in his chart. And clearly this guy was playing out the Mars part in his chart as well. But Ricky's Mars isn't conjunct Algol like this dude's is.
Wow. That's wild, man. So I have true node in Leo. What does that mean for me? I got to emerge more as a leader.
Yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about that. Don't you have like a Jupiter in Leo? You have some other planet in Leo too.
Yeah. I have Moon, Jupiter, and the true node.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting too, because, those planets are behind your sun, right? Like, because you're Virgo, the way Virgo lines up, it's ahead of Leo. So people don't always see that about you. They'll see the Virgo side of you, right? Maybe your Virgo sun, you got Mercury in Virgo too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. So they'll see that part, but what they won't see is kind of the Leo strength underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, that would be a perfect kind of combination of somebody, because Virgo is a sign that's pretty accountable, right? It's a pretty accountable sign. It would be a great combination of somebody who's accountable and doesn't mind doing the dirty work, but it also has kind of a more exalted view over what they're doing, right? Like, I'll tell you what it would be a really good example of that would be like somebody who is a commander, like maybe a major or a general, right? And a lot of times majors and generals aren't in the field with their soldiers. But that would be a situation where somebody like you would do well at that, where you could be in the field, right? Be like, oh shit, look who's next to us, and then it'd be like raising the morale of the troops and stuff like that, because that Leo part would kick in and say, I got to go be here. I got to go do this, because you would feel something passionate. You have to feel, you would feel something passionate. I'm just using this as a kind of a military example.
Yep. Makes total sense.
But there are other examples for something like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were in a union, right? Like if you were in a union, you would be a union leader. Like that's how it would work. You wouldn't just be one of the guys that shows up at the meeting. You'd be a union leader. Does that make sense?
So, it does make sense. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But speaking of Leo, we got to get into the prime time Leo, Mr. Deion Sanders and his Buffalo. The Colorado Buffaloes getting absolutely destroyed against the UCLA Bruins.
Well, it's interesting because the eclipse that happened this weekend is in square with Deion's sun in Jupiter, also in square with his Mercury. And, he said some stupid fucking things at his press conference.
Yeah. So specifically, he said, well, first of all, let's get into the game because I watched the entire game. Basically, the UCLA defensive line was teeing off on Shedeur Sanders. They got through that offensive line like they weren't even there. And this speaks to more, in my view, to the offensive coordinator, Sean Lewis. He's done after the season. He's garbage for the most part. And the offensive line coach, he's done after the season. But it also speaks to Dion, because what I personally have been observing quite a bit watching this team is that Dion doesn't actually coach in terms of like in-game adjustments. He doesn't do any of that. It's all on the coordinators. So he essentially watches the game. He recruits, he gives speeches, and then when it's game time, he essentially watches and gives motivational speeches. Because what's the downside of this air raid is, okay, the fullback's been eliminated, but what's next on the chopping block is the tight end. And so the Colorado Buffaloes, they use one tight end who they essentially use as a wide receiver. He barely blocks, this kid Mike. He's a good player. He's a good receiver. He's not a great blocking tight end. So what happened was they had their 5 linemen. UCLA has outstanding defensive linemen. And they sacked. It was just an atrocious display of offense. They couldn't do anything. And Shedeur Sanders, he looked gassed. He looked tired. He looked beat up. After the game, Dion basically says he's going to get new offensive linemen. He says, somebody asked him, like, where do you see this thing going? He's like, well, I'm going to get new linemen. Let me paint that picture perfectly. So let's say you're in the lineman's shoes, right? You're blocking for Shedeur Sanders. He's making millions of dollars. He's top 5 NIL. You're struggling. Your coach just publicly said that he's going to get rid of you.
You're playing Matador. Here you go.
And dude, here's the thing. It's going to get worse because their schedule is no joke. The Pac-12 is the best conference in college football this year. And let's see who they got left. Like when they play Washington, they could lose by 60. And the crazy thing is, but I have to add this little wrinkle here, even though it's looking pretty tough, Dion is landing big time recruits. Because just me as a guy on the internet, I have access to all the information in the world, and they're getting big time recruits. They got the number 1 quarterback out of the state of Georgia, specifically that kid, but we'll see. Because here's the thing, man, if these players commit, doesn't mean anything. They could decommit the next week and go to another school.
They could. They absolutely could. I mean, look, he's playing. He's getting Shedeur Sanders to throw the ball, 45 times a game, something like that, 40 to 45 times a game. And he's trying to get his son the Heisman fucking trophy. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's what he's trying to do. And you could set up a running game if you wanted to. Right. Right. You could do bubbles. Do they throw bubble screens? I don't even think they throw bubble screens.
A little bit. I mean, here's
much,
the thing.
Right?
It's like, even for the casual football fan, you can see there was no offensive adjustment, like at all. And it was pretty painful to watch.
Yeah. So he's look, if I'm objective, like who are the kids that are going to go there to Colorado? Like,
I'll tell you, because I've been paying attention. I've been paying attention to it as a betting man, because potentially I could see them making the 12-team playoffs. Who's going there right now? They just had an offensive tackle commit big time. He's currently at a community college. He just committed today. They recently had the number 1 quarterback in the state of Georgia commit, a black mobile type quarterback. And they have probably one of the top 5 athletes in the country. I forget the kid's name, some kid out of California. But what I'm seeing is a pattern of skill players, not linemen, who basically want to build their profile through Colorado, because the fact remains that their games get tens of millions of viewers. Like they get a lot of ratings.
But they're dropping now. No, they're here's what's happening. Mm-hmm. The shine is coming off the program. Mm-hmm. Their games are getting moved to different time slots now. That's a fact. Right? Mm-hmm. That is a fact. And I don't think that their program and the way that Deion Sanders has set it up is sustainable. I just don't.
Right.
Like this is not John Calipari in Kentucky.
Right. Exactly. I tend to agree. And I think a quote from a player from Stanford, he tweeted this out and he really put things into context. This was a kid who plays for Stanford, and Colorado was up 28-0 at halftime against Stanford. They end up blowing it and losing it in double overtime. I'm just going to read this. He goes, a few thoughts on last night. Good always wins out, no matter how bleak it looks, Anderson wrote. When Coach Taylor got hired, he told everyone to stay and believe. Coach Prime told everyone to leave. We are program builders. They are mercenaries. I believe in Stanford football. You should too. And guess what? Stanford played over the weekend, and they played a top 10 team, I think top 7 team in Washington. They should have won. So with Stanford, you got to respect them as a program, because guess what? They're having a down year this year. They're always competitive, and they always play good schools. They play USC every year. They play Oregon every year.
They were pretty good with David Shaw for a while.
And Christian McCaffrey came out of that school. He's one of the best running backs in the NFL.
So when Jim Harbaugh was there, Jim Harbaugh was a great recruiter, and he had great coaches, and he turned the program around. And then David Shaw inherited the program, and he did pretty well for a while, but he ran out of gas because he wasn't the college genius, football genius. But there was, they had Toby Gerhart there. Toby Gerhart almost won the Heisman Trophy award, right? Played running back. So Stanford has had some good coaches, but they're not going to play the Colorado game. My feeling about Deion, and you and I talked about this before, he's a nomad. Deion's another nomad. He does not stay anywhere for an extended period of time. Mm-hmm. He started off with the Falcons. He played, 5 years for the Falcons, off to the 49ers, then the Cowboys. Plays about 5 years with the Cowboys. Then he's off to, the Ravens. And then he's off to the Redskins. And with his baseball career, started with the Yankees. Then he goes to the Reds. And then he goes to the Giants. And then he goes to the Braves. He's a nomad. He doesn't stay around for a while. Mm-hmm. The first season that Deion Sanders goes to a bowl with Colorado, if he stays that long, will be his last season. I guarantee you that.
All right, let me ask you a question, because you forecasted sort of this conflict between Coach Prime and his son Shedeur. And I think, judging by what happened Saturday, it could potentially happen sooner than later. If there's 1 or 2 more games like this, Shedeur is going to go to the NFL, and he's going to leave his dad behind in Colorado. That's what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with, fixed sign opposition with the two of them, Aquarius and Leo, and at some point, and I think this eclipse this last weekend is probably feeding into it, and Deion's singled him out, during the press conference, and I'm just proud of my son. I'm proud of him as, your son had to take a fucking pain-killing shot, to come back into the game, because you're putting him at risk and you're trying to pad his stats because you want him to get the Heisman fucking trophy. I think Sanders.
I think more so padding his stats for a potential NFL draft, because I think the Heisman's totally out of the question, because at this point, because typically how it's been done the last, 5 years or so, the Heisman typically goes to at least a competitive team. You know what I mean? A team that's going to go to a bowl game.
Right, but if his son has just supernatural stats, he could use that as
leverage.
An arguing point. If his stats are just so gaudy, but then he makes the case. Well, we were 1-11 last year,
right?
And we didn't have a very good line. And look at everything my son has done. He deserves to have the Heisman Trophy. I mean, he could certainly make that case.
Yeah, and I think something that else is worth mentioning is just the economic sort of dynamic between these linemen and Shedeur, and sort of maybe I propose this idea. Okay, so Shedeur needs more time. He should offer to buy the lineman watches. If you guys give me more time in the pocket,
right,
bust your ass, I'll literally buy you watches. That's what he should do if he was sort of a more of a leader.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Shedeur is not. He's not Josh Allen. I mean, size-wise, he can't take that beating.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see if the guy even makes it out of the season.
If anything happens like Saturday, it's not likely. It didn't look good. It was tough to watch. Even if you really dislike the Colorado Buffaloes and Shedeur, you wouldn't even enjoy watching what I watched on Saturday. It was just straight up unsafe.
So, you know what it reminds me of? This whole start to the Colorado season reminds me of the California Bears basketball team back in 1993. And in 1993, Jason Kidd was a member of that team. And they had a coach by the name of Lou Campanelli. And Lou was an old school coach. You know, he was a guy that demanded they play defense and, you know, pass the ball 3 times before you shoot, right? And they had a guy who was an assistant coach, a guy by the name of Todd Bozeman. And Todd was a great recruiter. Like, he recruited Jason Kidd. He recruited Ed Gray. He recruited all these guys in the program he recruited. Tony Gonzalez played on that team. 2 sports star, right?
Wow.
So the players eventually have this mutiny on the team. And Lou Campanelli's wife was dying of cancer during this time. And you could tell he was high strung and upset. So the players basically demanded that Todd Bozeman coach the team and Lou Campanelli get fired. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. The dean, the provost, the athletic director, they fired Lou Campanelli. They fired the dude. Now, they could say, well, you know, you could use this time to stay close to your wife. We'll make sure you get your salary, whatever. Right? So Todd Bozeman takes over. And all of a sudden, Todd Bozeman, who really was not a very good coach, was a great recruiter, basically let them do what they wanted. And it was taking, like, you know, the reins off of a racehorse who's pulling a cart. And Cal just went on this torrid streak. And they took that energy all the way into the NC2As, and they beat North Carolina. And people were like, whoa, Cal is, you know, they're going to do something. But they eventually lost. And everybody thought, okay, well, they're going to build on this. But they didn't. Todd Bozeman could not coach. He was good at getting talent, but he couldn't coach. And eventually they would say, you know, hey, Todd, why don't you get a, you know, kind of an older dude as an assistant to help you out? He wouldn't do it. So Todd Bozeman began to collapse under the weight of the expectations that he can actually coach a fucking team. And it turned really ugly. Like, at press conferences, he would snap at the reporters. Eventually, he eventually lost his job because he got involved with some kind of weird sex thing with somebody on campus. It was like borderline rape. And he's still floating around. I think he's like an assistant somewhere doing recruiting. But to me, Deion Sanders reminds me of Todd Bozeman in a lot of ways, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that opening game where there was just all hype, right? It was just all hype, and they could, you know, they could run through brick walls, right? Well, and eventually it happened to Cal. They at some point, you got to coach a fucking team. Mm-hmm. And Todd couldn't do it. And I don't think Deion can either.
You know what's a funny comparison?
What's that?
Do you remember Jeremy Lin?
Yeah.
Linsanity. So he had a couple good games and he's getting super hyped.
Yeah.
There's sort of a parallel here where, you know, the Colorado Buffaloes had a few good games and they're just getting
Jeremy
super
Lin,
hyped.
I have a different position on Jeremy Lin.
Okay.
Jeremy Lin was perfect for Mike D'Antoni's system. And Jeremy Lin suffered from Carmelo Anthony coming back.
Interesting.
Because the ball had to run through Carmelo Anthony. Mm-hmm. Right? And then Jeremy Lin became a different player once Anthony got back from being hurt. And I could see it. It's like, oh, here comes Carmelo. Jeremy Lin is not going to be Linsanity. And he wasn't. Right?
Yeah, I always felt like Jeremy Lin was artificially pushed to expand the game in China. It's already huge in China.
Well, they had Yao Ming. They didn't need Jeremy Lin. They had Yao Ming.
True, but I mean, like, Yao Ming had retired at this point. Yao Ming had a short career because of his foot problems, right?
He was the guy that was, you know, the bridge between I see where you're coming from. I don't think, and I'm as conspiratorial as it gets.
Yeah.
I just think that Jeremy Lin was really smart. I think he played at an Ivy League school, by the way. He was really smart and he knew what to do in Mike D'Antoni's up-tempo system. And Mike D'Antoni and Carmelo Anthony were terrible because Carmelo Anthony doesn't get up the floor and run. What does he do? He gets the ball and he'll back you down with his ass, right? And he'll do a pump fake and a pump fake and a pump fake and he'll do a turnaround jumper anywhere from like 20 to 30 feet. That's Carmelo's game. It's always been his game. He doesn't want to run. He's a great shooter, great, one-on-one kind of player, but not a great fit for that system. And, eventually D'Antoni lost his job. What do you do though? You can't say, hey, Carmelo, you're going to be on the bench because Jeremy Lin's rolling. Like that just doesn't happen. Carmelo made too much fucking money to do that. But I think the Deion situation is a lot closer to Todd Bozeman and the Cal Bears because they're just running off of this explosive energy. But it's kind of like you just shoot your wad. And unless you have coaching, you're not going to do well. By the way, Tom brought up something really interesting. Here, I got to throw this out. This has nothing to do with sports, but it will impact sports. I can tell you that right now. Biden sends war powers notification to Congress following strikes in Iraq and Syria. So we are about ready to go to war. And this is going to impact everything.
Mm-hmm.
And including sports.
Yeah. And you were saying something really interesting last night. You're saying what's going on specifically right now has further specific ramifications for 9 months from now.
That was with the eclipse. That was with the eclipse. Yes. So everything that was going on, and we're still in the eclipse wave.
Yeah.
Right. So 9 months out from now, we will see the ramifications of all this.
So I remember in the early 2000s, there was such a fervent enthusiasm for war. There was the patriotism was off the charts, and it was being utilized through sports for these overseas endeavors. I don't feel that same sense of enthusiasm this time around.
No, nobody wants it. No, well, no, I don't. I don't. And they're going to, we could just spend the next 2 hours talking about this.
Yeah, because this is the real game. Yeah,
this is the real
game.
The real playing field, right?
Yeah. This is where you play for keeps. You know what I mean? The players and the coaches.
The only people that have
results matter.
The only people that have any thirst for war in this country are people that are hooked on the this Christian fairy tale of the end times.
Like the Christian Zionists you're referring to.
Christian Zionists, they have thirst for the war because they believe that this will hasten Armageddon, which means that they'll get taken out by the rapture faster, and then it will eventually trigger the 1,000 years of peace or whatever, right? So you have a group of people who are thirsty for that, and they believe that Israel is an important component to that because there can only be a one-state solution and not a two-state solution. That's number one. There's also this underlying, I don't know, what would you call it? This underlying kind of obeisance to Israel, in that even though they're not Christian, right, it represents the Holy Land. And I think the whole thing is just completely bizarre.
Dude, right? It's taken me like a long time to wrap my head around the Christian Zionist thing because it is so bizarre.
It's all connected to the Schofield Bible, and Cyrus Schofield basically annotating the Bible in such a way that people get reoriented to this point of view. Wow. That's where it all starts. These are the only people that have any thirst for it. And then you have sort of the Republican patriot side of things where you get Dave Rubin and Mark Levin.
That's our Republican patriot, Dave Rubin.
Yeah, and Dan
It's such a
Bongino.
joke. It's just
and
such a joke.
The little shit
Ben Shapiro.
Ben Shapiro, right? Like,
right. He's awful.
now all of a sudden, Jordan Peterson, you can throw him in the mix.
He's like, okay, he is the most absurd drug addict in the game. He is just absurd. Okay.
And these people have been selling, they're selling this hardcore 24/7.
Right. And Jordan Peterson, I read his book and I realized, because there was so much hype in 2017, I was like, all right, I want to see what the hype is about. Right. Get the guy's book, read it. A couple chapters in, I realized this guy's fucking insane. Like, this guy is like off the charts, like just off his rocker.
Well, to be fair, I know some people who are actually helped by his book, because that book gave them some degree of purpose, right? It was like, oh, finally somebody's speaking to me and they're asking me to look at my life and to order my life in a way. But, he got exposed.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson got exposed, and he got exposed on a stage where somebody confronted him about Solzhenitsyn.
Right.
And it wasn't long after that his addiction went through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Because he
speaking of Solzhenitsyn, I got an idea I want to run by you, and it ties in with sports. I've been thinking about this. So when you think about Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you think about the Gulag Archipelago, right? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's the book. Yeah, and these gulags are basically these death camps, right?
Well, they're not always death camps. You can get out of them. We had a friend of the family who spent time in a gulag.
Interesting. I could make the case that part of me believes that Gillette Stadium is the modern day gulag. It's completely voluntary. People go there. They worship on Sundays, and they partake in, the alcoholism and the junk food.
That's an interesting idea. I think find a team that loses all the fucking time. Right now they're in the gulag.
Well, even if you're winning, you're still in the gulag, because it's like you're participating in this ritual.
You get out. You get to get out, though.
Right. So I'm saying the modern day gulag is voluntary. That's
right.
What I'm
but
saying.
If the team is perpetually losing,
mm-hmm.
then it's more gulag-like.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't get out of the samsara of losing.
Right.
So every time you go back, it's the same thing, right? So to me that's a voluntary gulag.
Yeah. So wait, what happened basically? So the United States struck Syria and Iraq just now?
Apparently.
Wow. Interesting. Let's check Drudge. I feel like Drudge. I still check Drudge all the time. I don't know if that's been confirmed yet, but that's an interesting take, because I just don't know why strategically Iraq would be back in the picture. I know geographically it's close,
basically what they want to do is they want to destroy as much petroleum infrastructure as possible
to take control of it.
Yes. Ultimately to move us into the Green New Deal.
The thing, I'm somebody who appreciates the art of propaganda, and I gotta say the propaganda this time around has not been effective. You know what I mean? It's just like these sensational atrocities that I just am very dubious of.
Well, they're at this point now where they don't care.
Okay.
They don't care if it's effective. That's where we are now. It's like, here's our propaganda. Fuck you. We don't care if it's effective. We're going to do it anyway. Right. And in some ways that's even more insulting.
Right.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly, but they don't care now. They're at the I don't give a fuck stage.
Right.
Which theoretically should even piss people off more.
Right. We'll see how it turns out, man, because these grand plans, I just don't see the public going for it this time around. Hopefully I'm right about that, just because it doesn't compare to the enthusiasm that I personally participated in the early 2000s. Wasn't Iran potentially? Yeah. I don't know.
I read a really interesting article last week, and it gets into the kind of the Jewish connections in Iran, and it has to
Mhm.
do with both the Shah Reza Pahlavi, who apparently comes from a Jewish line, and also even Khomeini, because they were able to trace the name Khomen, Khomen, to the same town that Khomeini originated from. And Khomen or Khomen is a very Jewish name, right? So Brandy's on the money there.
Interesting.
Yep. So
So,
Claire jumps in here, by the way. Claire
yeah.
is watching this from England right now, where there's
Oh,
a
wow.
pretty significant time difference.
What's up, Claire? How you doing? So, anyways, what I want to ask you, like, so war's going down now, astrologically, you think, or do you think it's going to really heat up in April when that other eclipse
Well,
occurs?
I think it's gonna. I think the war thing is gonna just. It's gonna happen.
Mhm.
The war heating up in April is here in this country. I'm sorry to say that.
Okay.
We have close to 400 to 500,000 fighting age men that have crossed this border, and to think that they're just going to be assimilated and, you know, working in construction or working in the kitchen is absolutely fucking delusional. Right? They're here for a reason, and not a good one. And I've been trying to talk to people about this in a way that doesn't mortify them, but that's what we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And you think that'll lead to balkanization, a lot of just eruption here
It's going to be
domestically?
ugly. It'll be very
Okay.
ugly.
You were saying astrologically it's more significant than COVID or Bologna viral?
Oh shit! It'll make COVID look like the good old days.
That's hilarious. That is somewhat hilarious. I have a good attitude about these things. I'm rather positive. I like to see
That's all the
humor in
Leo.
these
That's
things.
the Leo you've got, like
Okay.
the optimistic Leo.
Yes. Absolutely.
We
Like,
can
you know
conquer
how we were
any
talking about,
path.
dude, you know how we were talking about people that I find funny, and like I find people funny that like aren't supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
I got a few more for you.
All right.
I find Kamala Harris to be hilarious. Okay. And a lot of people aren't going to like that. Hear me out. Kamala Harris reminds me, we were talking about marijuana earlier in the show. Kamala Harris reminds me of the kid in class who's completely stoned and they're up in front of the class trying to give a presentation. They're
Yeah.
trying their best not to laugh. Kamala Harris, when she gives a public speech, is trying not to laugh because she knows what she's saying is absurd. And she
Yeah.
knows, like, she knows the absurdity of her own
course.
personal
She's
situation.
She's in on the joke.
Absolutely. So she's up there publicly speaking and trying not to laugh.
Right.
It's funny. It's funny. She's like a likable stoner in my view, because she just finds herself in this ridiculous situation.
You can adopt her. That's fine.
Okay. She's like, how did I get here? You know what I mean? There's probably part of her that's pretty diabolical, but okay. This is the next one, that person that I find funny, and we're probably going to see more of her, unfortunately, but she's funny because she's so ridiculous. Nikki Haley, to me, is funny. Okay, because
dude, you've
Nikki
got a
Haley,
weird sense of humor. That's all I'm saying.
okay, because Nikki, like, I get her in very, very small doses. Okay, because Nikki Haley could give out a ridiculous take, and she's dead serious, and that to me is kind of funny in a way. Like, I've read her tweets, and I'm like, oh my god, she fucking really said that. Like, I laugh when I read it, like, because it's so insane.
That's on the unintentional humor scale.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I just had to tie those in because I feel like they sort of work with last week's conversation. And some other people, just random people on Twitter, I find funny.
Now, I actually think Hillary Clinton is funny.
She's funny in like an evil way. It's like
she has a evil, wicked, sense of fucking humor.
Right.
Right. I actually think, but do I like her? No. Do I think she's evil, wicked, funny? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I do. All right. I'm going to tell you this real quick story before we go. It has to do with Rasheed Wallace, the guy who we talked about last week.
Rasheed, okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of shorts that are showing up on YouTube, and he was talking about how he hates Bill Walton. You know who Bill Walton is, right?
I do know who Bill Walton is. I like him as an announcer. I think he's funny. I think Bill
Yeah.
Walton's funny. I think you're
Bill
funny.
Walton is funny.
I think
He
I'm
is-
funny.
Al, you definitely are funny.
Yes, I
Bill
agree.
Walton is funny. So, but Rasheed Wallace was going off on Bill Walton because Bill Walton was complaining back in the day when Sheed was with the Blazers, and he was complaining about all their weed smoking, and
Wow.
and so he knew a girl who knew Bill Walton, and I think it was Rachel Nichols, but it didn't come out. Anyway, she told him all about Bill Walton and how Bill Walton is a stoner, right? And so all of a sudden, Rasheed Wallace was pissed off because Bill Walton was a hypocrite. Okay, there are two different levels or layers to that story. So you know Sir Mix-a-Lot? You know that guy?
Rapper, yeah.
Rapper. Baby Got Back, that song
Yep.
about love big butts, right? So one time I had lunch with Sir Mix-a-Lot in Seattle. And it was back in the days where I was hunting around for catalogs for this company I work for. So me, him, and his manager. And his manager knew Nate McMillan. And Nate was the coach of the Jailblazers. And Nate McMillan told him that guys were getting high in the locker room
Wow.
in Portland, right? That's different than Bill Walton getting high recreationally,
Yep.
right? And I think that was really the sort of the nexus of what Walton's comments were about. And they were getting high probably before the game. They were certainly getting high after the game inside the locker room. I don't know. I used to play a lot of basketball, and every now and then, if I was in the right situation, I'd partake with somebody. And my depth of field just went away. I couldn't shoot the fucking ball.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I could run all day,
Yeah.
play pretty good defense, but forget it. My shot wasn't going in. It was just done.
Yeah. So I used to have an interesting work schedule where I would I was working at a call center at between 4 and 10, something like that, 3 and 10, I forget what it was. But YMCA basketball was at noon. So I would smoke before, and sometimes I wouldn't smoke before. But what I noticed when I would smoke pot before I played basketball, I was more likely to get into a confrontation.
Interesting.
Actually. Yeah, people would think it was the opposite, but it's not. Like I would be in sort of a THC infused competitive state. And I was just more I would get into little tiffs all the time.
You were smoking that mad weed.
I guess so, but yeah, basketball and pot sometimes work well together, but it's just ultimately way better just to be sober, especially with basketball. Sometimes they work together, but other times just
never
so much.
Never worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
But those days are come and gone. And speaking of come and gone, we've reached the end of the show.
We have. Is there any way? So I sent you this private chat. Can you see that little thing?
Hold on.
Because I think this is a great way to end in our little what's it called? StreamYard thingy here. If not, no big deal. Because it's just a clip of Aaron Rodgers warming up and throwing the football. It's sort of a cliffhanger, for things to come. But if not, we can
all right, let me play it.
Okay.
Because
I think it's very foretelling.
I think that the whole thing is faked.
Mm-hmm.
And so Pat McAfee is playing into the, as you like to say, the narrative.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, move it around. Here we go. The science is sick. It's certainly easier to come back from something when it's never happened.
All right, man. Great show. Audience, thanks for being here. We'll see you guys soon.
Come back next week. Get some more serious reports with me and my guy, Al Dawg. And, should we start looking at war as sport from here on out? Maybe we might get some more viewers.
Yeah, we got to do something. We'll do something. There's just so much we could cover in terms of.
Here's what we're going to do next week.
Okay.
Because he's a Scorpio, we are going to do a profile on what's his name? Pat.
Caleb Williams,
No.
the murderer.
No.
Drake.
No, Drake's a Scorpio.
Right.
God, now I'm blanking out. The guy who went to war.
Ted Williams.
No, that's another war.
Pat Tillman.
Pat Tillman, thank you.
Okay.
Shit, he's hanging out there. Next week, let's do a piece on Pat Tillman.
Okay, that sounds
Because
awesome.
We'll probably be in the war zone, and Pat Tillman lost his life because he decided to go fight for the USA. Right. So let's do a little Pat Tillman retrospect. All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. For myself and Al Dawg, this is Robert Phoenix. And of course, we urge you to stay serious. We'll see you next week.
Serious, man. You cannot be serious!
What's up, Joni? Oh.